into my sight with your daylights, 1,000 little Paris Hilton parasites, spreading apathy like it does the heat. No deuces, it's here to the empty. Market leeches wanna crawl far on the backs of the workers, petty bourgeois. Say it comes round, but I know it trickles down, and there ain't prosperity that's bleeding into this ground. When the earth swings, it's always our throats. So don't tell me that we're in the same boat. You're bleeding us dry while your pigs fly. How you play your blame games? You think I'm blind? It ain't a brown man that tried to cut my pay. It ain't a white man that took my rights away. It ain't a black man that sold me down the line. It was a rich man. And every fucking time see you attack the working as you persecute the poor. Then you stand there and tell me there's no class war. Don't pretend to me you ain't a friend to me. You're just a last enemy.
Hello, comrades, and welcome to the first episode of Confessions of a Marxist. My name is Alex.
My name is Josh.
I'm Desmond, and we are communists.
We are,
man.
And this first episode here is going to be our pilot. We're going to do a brief discussion, brief history about our personal lives, and a little bit about how we became Marxist-Leninists. And then we're going to move on to the second part of the discussion, which will be a little brief history of dialectical materialism. I'll start first. I grew up in Louisiana, New Orleans specifically, in a very religious household.
The swamp of the United States, right?
If you will, yes, absolutely. And we actually grew up, me and Desmond actually grew up together in this religious cult of Pentecostalism. We were both UPC apostolics, and for a long time of our lives, we were very much oppressed by that ideology, or religion, if you will. And growing up was always really challenging for us, just kind of being told where to go, what to think, who to trust, who not to trust, and our parents were very, very manipulative, but we found an outlet in knowledge. I would say that from an early age, Desmond and I both showed a lot of interest in intellectual things. Desmond, if I'm not mistaken, you used to do like science experiments and chemistry in his own bedroom, like by the age of like 13, I think.
Life.
That thug life, yeah. And
But as I got older, I got more interested in the social sciences. So that's kind of how I discovered Marxism.
Yeah, as did I. And I would say that Desmond is a huge influencer for me. And it was always really funny because I always thought myself to be an influencer to Desmond. And when it came to my ideology and when it came to Marxism, he really did an excellent job at guiding me through it and teaching me. He taught me. I honestly owe it all to you, Des. I'll say that now.
Well, comrade, for that sentiment.
Of course. And
Desmond is definitely kind of like the great teacher, right? I mean, like, because like when I joined the Facebook communists and so on, like, and me and Desmond had a lot of arguments. I will say that we had a lot of arguments on the left book, but no, I mean, I think we can all agree that like he was like the great teacher. He really like laid down the law with some of the theory, some of the intellectual stuff. Because like I think me and you, Alex, like we're very passionate about Marxism. We've got that kind of vigor about it. But Desmond, he's the one who actually sits there and reads the Marxist works. He's reading the Science, Socialism, Scientific, and Utopia, and he's reading the Marx and Engels, and so it's kind of indispensable.
I've been recognized as an ideologue.
Absolutely. I would say Desmond definitely is our ideologue. Most of the Marxist material I've read over my life, I mean, I think were all recommendations from Desmond. I mean, I've read books that I never thought I would end up reading just for specific material, specific outlets inside of them that Desmond found very valuable to the revolution and to the leftist movement.
We studied together in my car.
Yeah, we did. We that's that's interesting. We come from very, very humble beginnings. Me and Desmond, we decided from an early age that this was important enough to us that we would study it by any means possible. And that meant sitting in his hot ass car. I mean, in the middle of, as Josh said, the swamp of America. So we're sweating our balls off here in the car reading Marxist material because we just needed to cram it that badly. It really does give you a sense of warmth. It gives you a sense of a grounding when you read Marxism. And that is a really important part of, I think, being a human, and as well as other things like exercise. Reading is important. And so to really get into the nitty gritty here, we're going to start with a basic introduction into Marxism in our own lives. Me and Desmond co-founded a group in New Orleans, Louisiana, that was set out to be a Marxist-Leninist study group at first. As we know through studying Marxism-Leninism, it is essential that we build up a cadre and a very intellectual group of people who can lead the masses, who can direct and educate the mass population, as well as assist in the revolution. And so that was kind of our idea for starting the study group, was just to find other educated people within our area to talk about Marxism-Leninism, to study it, to practice it in our daily lives, come up with a strategy, and execute.
And how many were there when we began? Like 8 of us, maybe, tops?
I think honestly it was 5, because it was I think it was 5 of us. So it was very, very, very humble beginnings, and we would meet at like local libraries or a comrade's house was often the place that they facilitated for us to meet. It was much like a commune, and it was beautiful at first. What we had built was our own, and we were extremely excited with what was to come. And I'll let Desmond take over and explain a little bit why we decided to part from this group later on. But we did eventually start to see some struggles, some hierarchy within the group. And me and Desmond had to make a conscious decision for ourselves if we were going to stay in this group and stay in support. And I mean, Desmond, I remember you were working a full-time job, going to school.
Oh, yeah, in a factory, wink.
Yeah, in a factory, like true proletarian, and this is
right.
It's crazy
a
for
box factory.
Yeah, and that's nuts for Louisiana. There is no real industry there. It's just all service industry. It's all hospitality. It's all restaurants. So Desmond was very much a true proletarian.
Yeah. So I worked 10 hours on the factory, and then I went home to study the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism, and that's what I was about at the time. And so we started this study group. And I think the main problem, for me anyway, is that we eventually stopped our studying and allowed ourselves to be drawn in to a lot of, more liberal activism. And that took away from our studying, and if we didn't study the material, it was really hard to apply the material, So that was an issue there. I mean, you can't have a Marxist-Leninist group if you're not propagating, if you're not studying. And I would also like to point out that in my opinion, the chief task of communists today should be to create more communists, not to be more popular with liberals, so
absolutely.
that's my 2 cents. Josh,
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, exactly what you said there, Desmond, and me and you kind of know the communists very well in that way. Like on Left Book, it's funny, me and you kind of have an interesting dynamic. Like you're proletarian and all that, and my family being kind of middle class, like petty bourgeois, like petty bourgeois scum, right? But I definitely no, exactly.
You're welcomed in our ranks as a class traitor to the petty bourgeoisie.
As a class traitor, no, I proudly bear the title of class traitor. I still get communists on Facebook that try to attack me. They're like, oh, you're the son of some freaking shop owner, and what do you know? It's like I'm sorry. Are you familiar with the fact that Engels' family owned a factory in the 1800s? It's like,
I mean, yeah, the man wasted his family's fortune on the revolution. So that tells you that right there, you know, like it's possible for the petty bourgeois. And I mean, these are comrades, Josh, you know. I mean, you know, I see a lot of working class people who are even way harder to win over to the leftist side because of just their lack of education. And this is just a product of capitalism, you know. It is a device.
Another thing about the New Orleans, that's another thing I noticed about the New Orleans workers group. Like sometimes they would alienate people for class reasons, or at least pretend that was the reason. And I think that was a bit of a disservice.
Well, you know, it's like it reminds me of a quote. Like, you know, if you know, like, you'll allow me. Like, it reminds me of a brilliant Lenin quote. Like those who it's about despair. Despair is typical of those who who do not understand the causes of evil and are incapable of struggle. Like these cadre, a lot of these people, a lot of these so-called communists, they don't understand how to raise working class consciousness, so they resign themselves to merely these kind of petty disputes of, oh, so and such is a bourgeois, so and such is a reactionary, so and such is this and that. Because, like, you know, when you really have to deal, like you'll almost allow me to be a bit of a cynic here, like a bit of a bourgeois cynic, right? But when you really have to deal with working class people, it can be very difficult. Like they've been, like, Absolutely. You know, they've been, they are the target of the system. Like if you were to, like, I'm sure if you were to talk with a slave during the times of the Roman Empire, like, you know, it would not be like, yeah, let's kill the Caesar and the aristocrats. Like, he would look at you and be like, I'd be like, I'm sorry, are you trying to get me killed, or are you trying to get yourself killed, right? I mean, like, the working class does not like to be galvanized in that kind of way. Like, but if you want to authentically engage with the working class, you have to raise their class consciousness. And it's not about, like, it's not this, you know, like I said, it's not like this galvanized, you're not like trying to teach a kid how to swim, right? Like, it's not like, all right, come on, children, let's like get in the swimming pool. Like, no, the working class knows what they're doing. They have the instruments of power. But if the cadre are in fault, if they don't know how to direct the masses, then it's useless. It's not a communist party. It's not not anything.
Precisely. And that was and for our viewers, just so they know, that is the whole, you know, one of the biggest inspirations for us to do this podcast today is, of course, all of the civil unrest in the United States. As of yesterday, Washington was put into martial law. So we're living in a very interesting time right now, and we find it more and more important each day as each day goes by to just put our ideas out there and solidify that, you know, we're aware of what is happening. We have been predicting all of these things, you know, a lot of times before they happen. So we decided, you know what, why not put our voices out here just to be heard, just to raise discussion and raise awareness. And that would lead me, I guess, into our next point. We use a lot of Marxist terminology, and for the viewers that are tuning in now, I'm sure that a lot of this can probably go over the average person's head. As we talked about, the working class, you know what I mean? They have all the instruments, but the knowledge is really not there.
Like,
there are no Marxist schools of thought.
It is a, you know, Alex, like it is a good thing though that we Marxists are not Hegelians, because, like, you know, the Hegelians use far worse terminology than even us. So you know, like, it's not so bad.
Exactly. And I would agree with that. I would agree that the terminology that we're using right now isn't so bad, and I agree that, you know, for our viewers who do want to know a little bit more about Marxism, I'll go ahead and put a link in the description of this video or in the comment section, linking you to a couple different Marxist books, just some very beginner level stuff, just to kind of give you a general idea of what it is that we mean when we say these things. Josh, if you will, go ahead with your introduction, man. I would really love for our viewers to hear your background in Marxism and how you and Desmond relate to each other.
Well, like the way I'd like to introduce myself, because they probably heard it if my microphone audio is worth anything. Like they probably heard the tick from the text message on my iPhone. Like, so if I want to introduce myself, what I would really say is I'm a bourgeois pig. I have an iPhone, and this whole time you've been talking about communism and the working class. I've been sipping Coca-Cola. So
Bourgeois.
Well,
like
you live a very classy life, Josh. I really appreciate that.
like honestly, but but
Man
I
of
still
quality, indeed.
no, but like I would absolutely say that without a doubt, like I am a communist. Like I even had people ask me, like, your father owns a shop and so on, and with the riots, like, what would you? I'd say if like obviously I would tell them, don't target this shop. Like I support you, but if they burn down the shop, I would say, good on you. Like right, like I mean,
Yeah,
you've done
at
me,
least
you've done
at
me a
least
real. You've
yeah.
done me a real service, right? Like I'm, the first thing I would do, Alex, I'd post on Facebook. I would say, like, my dad's store just got burned down by the rioters, but I still support the rioters. I'm happy.
Absolutely. So if that's any testament to how much of a Marxist you are, yeah, it's an excellent testament.
Exactly.
And we're really happy to have Josh here, man. Me and Desmond have been so me specifically. Desmond had the left book, as Josh likes to call it, which is just like the leftist Facebook page, or pages, if you will. But
It's that
me
whole
personally,
section of it's that whole cancer section of the earth.
and the only like leftist Facebook pages I've ever even really been on were that of like some I went to this like utterly ridiculous brochureless page, and like I don't want to start anything with the brochureless man, but like that was definitely hilarity ensued. And
In
I would say
regards to
that,
left book,
yeah, sure, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in regards to left book, it's really like hell is other Marxists. You know what I mean? And I would actually encourage all Marxists to avoid Facebook like the plague.
Yeah,
But
absolutely, because I don't think it's not a valuable outlet for discussion, because you
I
have
think
too
Josh
many.
might disagree with us though.
Mm.
Well,
That's interesting. Let me make this point. Let me make this point, and then I'll pass this over to Josh, and we can continue talking about uh, left book. But I would say that, like, it's really for me, it's really important to find some outlet, some base of social media, somewhere you can put this type of content and raise some kind of like healthy discussion about all these things that are happening throughout the world and throughout, of course, our nation that we live. And I would say that, like, for me, being a Marxist, Desmond was the only person in pretty much my entire life, besides the New Orleans Workers Group, that he was the only Marxist I had that outlet with, and and that is one of my personal reasons for creating this podcast, as just a way to facilitate great discussion, and Marxist discussion specifically, and educate those who are unaware of geopolitics, who are unaware of what's actually taking place in our country, and who are also unaware of Marxism. But I'll pass this over to Josh now. If Josh, you want to
I have to defend, I have to defend myself. Like if I'm, I'm one of those people, like, but I never shy away from an argument. Right. Well, about the whole Facebook, like it should, like there's a lot of plagues that should be avoided. Like, the government says that you should try to avoid going out much, because of coronavirus, and people don't really avoid that plague either. I think we have even less reason to be optimistic that people will avoid the plague of Facebook. But, I say in it that there is one thing that the Facebook and left book and Politogram, Instagram, for that matter, like, you talked a lot about needing outlets, and what I would say, if you'll allow me to be vulgar for the viewers, is it is a masturbatory endeavor, but masturbation is necessary in a way. Like if you don't do it, you'll do far worse things. Like there are worse things in the world to do.
Absolutely.
And no,
Well,
I mean seriously.
anyone listening could probably tell that Josh is a fan of Slavoj Žižek.
You know, it's a guilty pleasure.
I
But
think later
seriously,
on we'll explain exactly what he means. But for right now, just go ahead
I
and
have
Google
to.
that.
The only way I can take myself seriously is if I use these vulgar metaphors. Like I can't explain things in an intellectual way. I almost have no faith in the intellect. I have no faith in the written word. Like I know if I write like several paragraphs and I put it on Facebook, I'll get like one like react, you know, and somebody will read something in it that they didn't like and comment. But at least if I say something vulgar, I might get like a few angry reacts. Like you know,
Exactly.
it's almost has to be
It's
that
almost a
way.
better reaction, right? Yeah,
It
yeah,
almost
it's
is.
almost the reaction you're looking for.
Also,
And
I
yeah,
know
we don't want
Desmond.
it to be any other
Yeah.
way.
I almost would like to say too that Desmond can't really say much because I did meet him because of Facebook. So you know,
That's
you can't be too cynical.
That's true.
it is good for making connections and for engaging in healthy debate. You know what I mean? Just exchanging information, and it really encourages you to study, even more, and to be introduced to new viewpoints and things like that. So it does have its uses, but
Like
point
communism is
is,
really no different. You know, the no Desmond, like the communist movement is really no different. I know you were homeschooled, so you wouldn't really understand this analogy, but it's almost like high school because the common obsession after you get out of high school is to go and find profiles of people that you went to class with and check in, and you know, you tell yourself like, I don't really care about this person, like I you know, like they're less than dirt, they're like this Stacy girl and Amy and like I don't care about these women, right? Like even you might even be in a relationship, and yet there's still this really pernicious desire to check in on these people, and even in a really spiteful way. Maybe this is just me, but I'll grant the benefit of the doubt. You almost want to be like how badly is this person doing in life? Like are they, you know, are they really doing so bad? And it's almost like affirmational. Like you see they're working at McDonald's and they're just really like not. No, but I mean plight of the working class. Like I'm not a monster, but I'm just saying you know like
so
it's it's the same with the Marxist though. Like one of the things about Facebook that's important is you get to check in on comrades and see, like I've seen stories, hopeful stories. Like I've seen comrades who were hopelessly mired in reactionary ideas. I was one such person myself, but you know, there are success stories, and I go back and talk with these comrades and I say, okay, you know, how did you change? How have you taken this more, you know, progressive stance? And they share like, oftentimes it's a personal story rather than a political one.
Correct. Yeah.
And you have to be there. Like you have to be there to experience it. Like if you're not there, you don't
Yeah.
get to experience you don't get to experience the pleasure without the suffering. Not to get into all that Taoist kind of anecdotal, that old allegorical wisdom,
don't
but
get me started.
no, please don't. Like I'll leave the podcast honestly, but uh, that's
Well,
my
I guess, and this is what I'll say. I agree with you, Josh, and I think it's important for comrades to band together, not only politically but personally. I think a lot of people, especially in the working class, we do like, we have it rough, man. Working a service industry job, you have to go in. You could be dead smack in the middle of a divorce. You could be in the middle of battling for custody for your children. You still have to go to work, and you still have to kiss ass. You still have to look at these customers in the face and tell them, you know what I mean, like, and just make sure that their every whim is catered to. And this is challenging. So I think that Facebook is a very good outlet for people to just link together and just be like, hey, like for proletarian class workers to be like, we're in this together. This is a way to link together these struggles. But I feel like it's important for us as Marxists to have a presence also in just everyone's life, like those kids from high school, who work at McDonald's. And I have a very, very optimistic view of the working class. I believe that most people, if you speak to them, if you can show them that you're genuinely caring about, you know, their personal struggles, if you show them that you relate to their personal struggles, and you try to give them an alternative or an outlet such as Marxism, I find that people are especially working class people, are very receptive to that type of outreach. And so, you know, so it doesn't work all the time, of course, you know, because normies are going to norm, but you know, I find that, like, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And as a Marxist, we should always be venturing. We should always be reaching out to people. As Marxists, we should always be speaking our minds, you know. And that kind of brings me to our next point. Not really, but I'm going to do a hard segue here into dialectical materialism, which is kind of the basis of Marxism-Leninism, if you will. It's and I'm going to pass this discussion over to Josh and Desmond, because they're kind of our ideologues, right? But dialectical materialism, in my mind, is just a scientific way to analyze society, analyze societal evolution. We use words such as like social anthropology in Western culture to describe dialectical materialism, but they're generally kind of one and the same. And I'll go ahead and pass that discussion over to you guys and let you elaborate a little bit more on that.
All right, what's your take, Josh?
You know, it's a far harder task than one might think. Like, but the foundational statement of it being a scientific way to analyze society is definitely a way to think about it. But, like, you know, and if you'll allow me, Alex, to be a little bit critical of you, it's
Sure.
very no, like, you know, you're my comrade and everything, but it's a very Western way to, it's a very, like, bourgeois liberal Western way to frame it. What we really talk about when we're talking about dialectical materialism is a methodology. I like to compare it with the scientific method, but it goes a little bit deeper than the superficial, than that superficial level. So first and foremost, I think it's best to talk about dialectical materialism is kind of like God. It's easiest to talk about what it is not. So what dialectical materialism is not is it's not a form of divination. It is not a Da Vinci Code, so to speak, and so on. And I'll explain this brilliantly. Like, people often talk about, and really it was Fukuyama who, that absolutely, you know, vulgar thesis that liberal capitalism would be the end of history. It's like the ultimate irony now, you know, but to look back on it, right? Like in the 90s, people were so optimistic about liberal capitalism that they thought it would be this was the highest stage of human development. And yet we often think, so often we say that Marx and Engels thought that communism would be the end of history, and that communism would be inevitable. Now, this does take a lot of leaps and bounds and assumptions. So the way Marx and Engels came to their conclusions about communism as an end goal to human development comes from a few different observations. So Marx and Engels observe that human societies evolve based on the level of advancement of the modes of production, the mode of production itself. So I always like to give an excellent example here to illustrate what this really means. What this does not mean is that human history is a cycle or is a linear process of continual progress. Like, we're going to start, you know, we started out as cavemen, and then we became, you know, more advanced thinkers in language, and then we became industrial, and then we're going to become space travelers. No, this is actually a liberal, this is a very liberal idea. What Marx and Engels observed is that society's progress is inherently tied to how advanced the mode of production is. So, for example, during slavery times, the mode of production was primitive. Things have to be done by hand, and so by manual labor and so on. And then in feudal times, you know, there's artisans who produce slightly more advanced tools, but it's still primitive, and then industrial society and so on. Now, if feudal society had come across a catastrophe, like a real crisis, and melt down, let's say like the Black Death killed so many people and so much progress was lost that it reverted back into the slave economy. Has Marxism, so does that mean that Marxism was refuted? No. Marxism was not refuted because Marx and Engels would only say that the mode of production was primitive and society's mode of production could not handle the catastrophe. If the mode of production was more advanced, if they had industry, if they had medicine, like Marx and Engels make this very good point, and I want to say this too to all these liberal kind of liberationists. It's like they, there's a quote by Marx and Engels where they talk about how real liberation has to be achieved in the real world through real means. I'm paraphrasing a bit. So you cannot imagine the abolition of slavery without the invention of industrial machines to displace manual labor and so on. Like, it's not possible. Like, you could take the most evangelical abolitionist, like bleeding heart liberal, and place them in the 17th or 18th century. They're not going to be able to end slavery until the mode of production has been advanced. This is the most critical observation of Marxism, and this is what dialectical materialism is all about. And I'd like to add too that Rosa Luxemburg coined a really beautiful phrase that is more apt today than ever: the phrase socialism or barbarism. Like, Marx and Engels said that capitalism, with all of its crises and catastrophe, the mode of production being controlled by capitalists rather than workers, would inevitably come into crisis, come into conflict. And that's what we're seeing today. That's what we've been seeing for the last 100 years. And today, with the pandemic and with nuclear threats and climate catastrophe and so on, like, if the capitalist system does not evolve into socialism, capitalism will destroy itself and revert to a more primitive mode of production. And if that happens, people will say, so Marxism has been refuted. But once again, Marxism has not been refuted. All Marx and Engels have said is that the mode of production will determine how advanced society becomes. Now, I will grant one thing. Marx and Engels were optimists. They were optimists about people. They thought that with the class consciousness being elevated, with education, capitalism would evolve into socialism, and then socialism will smoothly transition into communism. Of course, there will be violence. Marx and Engels were not pacifists for anything, but they were optimistic. Now, if people, and it's a psychological problem, if people do not handle the contradictions, if they don't take the problem seriously, if they don't update the mode of production, then capitalism will perish. And revert.
So here's a question. Here's a question I would ask. This is a question that raises with our current mode of production being completely deindustrialized in America, we're witnessing, this pandemic kind of sweep through our nation and create. I mean, it started, of course, with the pandemic, but there's been so many accounts of police brutality over the last, just the last 100 years, that, especially against, people of color, that so the question I would ask you, applying dialectical materialism to the current state of the United States, what should we expect, from these next coming months? Because a lot of people are kind of viewing this whole thing as the looming doom of capitalism, and I've noticed this trend in American socialists where they're all extremely gung-ho about the rioting and the protesting and stuff as if it will bring about the demise of capitalism. So I want to just kind of
seems like they too are optimists. Right.
And as we're seeing too, with the current rioting and protesting in the United States, it's very spontaneous. There isn't much organization, and there's not really a plan set or really a strategy set out to reinstitutionalize, these brutal police officers. I've even Josh, I believe you were telling me stories about how they were sending feelers out into the field to recruit skinheads and biker gangs and drug addicts to recruit them into the police force. because that's how desperate they are to like maintain order and control over the mass population. So this kind of, for me, is very reminiscent to fascism, and you know what I mean. We're seeing an increase of more and more Nazis on the police force who are militantly armed. So what is this applying dialectical materialism to this whole United States system? Where do you see us heading in the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
Well, first and foremost, before I answer your question, I'll make another kind of like controversial take here, but it is absolutely true that the police departments and so on, like we knew from 2016 onwards, this President Trump and so on, he refused to denounce the KKK and so on. Like people like David Duke endorsed him. People in the KKK endorse him, and we know, like, I'm not saying that there's some Kabbalah that Donald Trump is in contact with the KKK, but we know that Donald Trump does not mind the KKK supporting him and all these races. But it's really not the Nazis that obviously the Nazis are disgusting and so on, but like it's not the Nazis that really scare me about the future. What really scares me is the failure of liberals to comprehend their own situation in such a meta way. Like as early as 2016, people were talking about, fascism. Donald Trump is a fascist, and making the comparisons to Hitler, and it was too much too soon. Like as somebody that's actually, I wrote several papers about the Third Reich, about the rise of Nazism in Germany, and I hate to make the Nazi Germany analogies, but what we're actually, before I would say no, but what we were really heading towards is a very similar path that was embarked upon in Germany during the period of the 1920s and early 1930s. Because what did you really have? You had a left that was impotent, and you had a right wing that was desperate. So what does this really mean? The right sees itself as being the kind of persecuted group in society. Like whenever Donald Trump is putting out his tweets and so on, he's always, the Democrats are out to get us, the Antifa are out to get us, I'm being attacked by the media, I'm being attacked by the protesters, I'm being, like he's crying out in agony as a victim. But like we know that the right in America has had unprecedented control, like the Supreme Court, Senate, White House, at a time, the House of Representatives, like it's unprecedented. And the left is totally impotent. The left is paralyzed. Like this is the situation you had in Germany. For one, you had the Social Democrats at that time in Germany, who kind of, they didn't really like the communists so much. They kind of viewed the communists as like kind of vulgar, as kind of, they're kind of extremist, right? And they kind of put on airs to the right wing, like, we Social Democrats, we're not like those communists. We don't want to seize your property and so on. Just please be a little less racist. Please lock up a little bit less journalists, and so on. And like snubbing the communists. Like the great betrayal of communism in Germany was not caused by Adolf Hitler. It was caused by the Social Democrats when President Friedrich Ebert, the first elected president of Weimar Germany, he was a Social Democrat, and he ordered the military to go and put down the Spartacist League, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and the communists. This is very little known history, but Hitler was just some ex-soldier roaming the streets when Social Democrats were murdering communists. And in America, that's what I really fear, is the betrayal will come from the left, not from the right. And as for where I see things going, but in a weird way, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I don't think that the situation in America is nearly as favorable as the situation was for Germany during the 1920s. Like, as ironic as that sounds, because the difference between Germany in the 1920s and 30s and America is that Germany had industry, and we so happen to not. Like the imperialists are definitely heading towards a direction of antagonizing China, which will be very bad for the United States. And
Mhm.
I definitely do foresee that the system will kind of the system is slowly starting to break down, and we're going to see a kind of period of stagnation, like like very strong stagnation, I would say. But eventually, it's going to become chronic crises, crisis after crisis, crisis after crisis. Like we're already seeing it in India, the plague of locusts in the Congo. There's another outbreak of Ebola. We're
Yeah.
entering the politics of crisis, and
Yeah, absolutely. And
capitalism is
the
a constant
inevitable
crisis.
politics of crisis. Mother Earth has a way of has a way of making things challenging for humans as well as providing everything we need. And I think at this point, we're really starting to see which governments are more efficient at you know at being prepared for these worldwide pandemics, these worldwide situations where humans have no control. We just literally have to hunker down and wait it out. And being in America during this whole pandemic, let me just say that, and I'm sure you guys feel it too, but um yeah, this is not good at all. And in the mentality of everybody else around, especially me. Currently I live in Florida, in a little place called Brevard County, which is probably one of the reddest fucking counties in Florida. And the people here are absolutely aloof. They don't wear masks. They haven't worn masks. This is like where this is the county where you see those videos of like people at Walmart like coughing on other people and like spitting in people's faces. Uh, and it is very scary because I honestly haven't left my house much since since the quarantine, for good reason. Of course, we're on a lockdown. You stay inside and everything else. But the police force here, I was reading an article the other day that the police force here is receiving a bunch of military grade weapons and explosives and stuff. So they're preparing here to completely just they're because I don't know if you guys are aware, but in Orlando there was civil unrest and they were burning cop cars and stuff, which is an hour away from me. So they're preparing definitely for the worst down here. But um, in this current world climate that we're in, Josh, you were saying that the imperialists are going in and attacking China, which is going to be absolutely horrible for the United States. Us being completely industrialized means that we lose a lot. And I mean, what, 80% of more than 80% of everything that is shipped to the United States is, from China, is manufactured in China. So we're going to see a very large shortage of commercialization, and that, to me, I wonder how currently I'm wondering how the Americans are going to deal with, however long, if China were to put sanctions or token sanctions on the United States, how long would it take for the American people to realize, what I mean, that, what I mean, and what would be the conditioning here, for that? Donald Trump would have to make advances towards industrializing America, and then this great nation would be no longer a resemblance of its old self. It'd be something completely different.
And
That would be a
like
good
I'm an
day.
optimist. I'm an optimist in a few different ways about it. Like, for example, I don't think that America has a lot of the same luxuries that, like, I think we need to get out of the psychology of the repetition of fascist takeovers and so on and so on. But, like, I don't think that America has a lot of the same luxuries. Like, for example, with the whole racism, one of the things I was really glad to see was that a lot of white people really did stand in, like, one of the first points that a lot of people made about the protests, right, was that oh, the blacks are going around looting and so on and so forth. And people pointed out correctly, no, many white people, many people of all different races actually
Yeah,
joined in the
absolutely.
protests. Like, and
Absolutely.
it's a really tremendous thing to point out. We've moved very far culturally in that way, but I don't think that this is where I'm an optimist. racism and so on cannot solve, is not even really like a sellable solution. But because if it was, it would really already be manufactured. Like, we have reached a point of complexity of capitalism, and in this way, capitalism is its own enemy. Where, for example, if your doctor is Chinese and the guy that owns your shop is Indian, and the guy who's helping to construct your roads is like a southerner, and the guy who's on your like at a certain point it just reaches such a level of interdependence that how you can't even sell the racism as a solution to there is no more like the capitalists have lost the proverbial Jews. There is no more proverbial Jews. Like, Trump has been lashing out at just random, oh, it's the Antifa, or it's the, like, it's these people, and the Democrats, and it's like, Democrats, it's like, well, Democrats are about, what, 30-40% of the population. So if you're blaming Democrats, then you're really in trouble. Like, the capitalists have really ran out of a proverbial Jews. Like, it used to be, they tried to make it the Muslims before, and we saw these kinds of scapegoats just simply do not work anymore. And I'm not even like one of these liberal people who's like, oh, it's because we've learned peace and tolerance, and we've learned to love each other and diversity and so on. But no, it's an economic reality. Like, the United States is a very ethnically diverse nation, and we all depend on one another's skills and labor. And the thing that the capitalists really fear, though, and this is where, once again, Marxism comes in, the real enemy is always the working class. What the capitalists fear the most is the idea of a rejuvenated and revived working class, which is precisely why they fear reindustrializing. But the reindustrialization is already set into motion, because certain things have to be built here, like ventilators and masks and so on, like and medicines. These things have to be produced domestically. But the reason why the capitalists fear reindustrialization is because it will lead to the emergence of a working class. And in this way, the Chinese were far smarter than we, because the Dengists and so on, like, they kind of subjugated the world. I'm not going to speak on China or anything like that, but the Chinese have dealt with being an industrial nation, being a manufacturing nation in this way for many decades, whereas the United States has gotten very comfortable with this service economy. But the days, I would say, me and Desmond, one of the things that me and Desmond have been saying most loudly for the last few years is that the service economy is dead.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And I'd like to have Desmond comment a little bit on this. I know, Desmond, you've been kind of quiet for a little bit here, but I know you have some interesting points to make as far as
probably not by choice, right?
Yeah, no, not by choice, but the prima donna, of course, takes over.
Surely.
Oh yeah, the windbag Josh thing.
Yeah. He's I think we all have a lot of interesting points to make on the current climate of the United States, and I think Desmond, you probably out of both of us, I think you probably have more the more interesting points, and I'd like to hear that now, if you will.
Well, yeah. Well, what Josh was saying is right. He and I had talked for a long time about, we've been very critical of the so-called service economy as a sustainable system, and now that there's this global crisis, now we're starting to see a trend towards against globalization. So I think this is a very positive trend, because people are starting to see that maybe it's not a great idea to have all your stuff come from everywhere else, So,
and as far as the ideas of dialectical materialism, just to give you a chance to go ahead and clarify, do you agree with Josh for the most part when he was saying, because we rewind a little bit, but Josh was saying that dialectical materialism is actually not a linear explanation of existence.
Yes, it's actually a very important point that he brought up. We had this discussion the other day.
Excellent. I'd love to stress that point, if you will.
Like he said, it's meant to be a type of divination. Like, this is inevitably going to happen, or that's going to happen. It's a method of analyzing the different components at play, and the different contradictions and what the results could possibly be from that. You know, I know you brought up Rosa Luxemburg, you know, socialism or barbarism. So I mean,
Desmond, I think you're breaking up there a little bit.
Yeah.
We're having a little trouble here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of
But
technical.
I think it's important to make this point, because like a lot of Marxists kind of take a sort of.
Well, you know what it is, Desmond. It's like, you know, the problem with, I'm gonna sound like a bit of a PC liberal here, but the problem with Marx was that he wasn't a woman. Like Rosa Luxemburg put it beautifully, like using that poetic language, socialism or barbarism. I think Karl Marx, his problem was he wasn't a woman. He did not phrase it very poetically, like. Yeah, but absolutely. It's absolutely true. And just to kind of wrap up this, because I think we've just about covered really all the
absolutely, yeah. That's the entire agenda there
of dialectical materialism. Like the important takeaway is, you know, like the reason why Marx is not a Hegel, like the reason why we're not Hegelians, the reason why we're Marxists is precisely because Marx rejected Hegel's linear notion that history is the advancement towards freedom, you know, some kind of abstract paradise that we are just, you know, moving along the railroad course of. Marx and Engels embrace a little bit more chaos than that. They show that history, you know, that there's revolutions, there's periods of great progress, and then there's periods of great setbacks and so on. But fundamentally, what remains constant is the class contradictions, class struggle, you know, landowners and serfs and the capitalists and the workers, and that the mode of production remains the fundamental, the engine of society. The level of progress is directly linked with the mode of production itself. This cannot be neglected. And so if we take seriously the task of human liberation, we have to object real liberation in the real world. Not on Facebook or Instagram. Sorry, liberals and other people.
sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry, of course. So I think that concludes this segment.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who made it all the way to the end, thank you guys so much for tuning in for the first ever pilot episode of Confessions of a Marxist.
You get like, this is a Stalinist bureaucracy, you know. So if you made it all the way to the end, you get a special prize from the state. You get a medal of heroism.
Gold star.
Gold star.
And once again, my name is Alex.
That
is Josh. Yeah, there we go. We're gonna work on it as we continue. But thanks again, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Fuck you little credit card scam and jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head.